Hello and welcome to another week of the Kickoff, the My Betting Mates podcast dedicated to all things A-League and English Premier League. I'm your host, Matt Galea, and I'm joined by the ever-reliable Josh Parrish. Welcome, Josh.
I'm not sure about ever reliable, but glad to be back with
Well,
you, Matt, and another really interesting week of action to discuss.
yeah, well, you haven't missed a week, so that makes you ever-reliable in my books, so we'll go from there. A big weekend behind us, another big weekend ahead of us, so we won't waste too much time and we'll get straight stuck into it. Kicking off with the A-League, and obviously last week we did have a bit of an in-depth discussion on Brisbane Roar ahead of their game with Sydney FC, and they obviously went on to lose the game 2-1. And it was really in a battle of two relatively new coaches to their teams. Ufuk Talay at Sydney FC really showcased how far his team has come under his guidance. He's obviously had a few more weeks under his belt than Ben Khan has. But what did you make of that game, and how have you seen Sydney FC's revival under Talay?
Well, from a Brisbane perspective, the new manager bounce didn't last long, about 53 seconds to be precise. But I did see some positive signs from them, especially in the second half, and they made a few adjustments, and they were definitely competitive, which was a big improvement on the 8-1 trouncing at the hands of Melbourne City the week before. But for Sydney, I mean, the stats are off the charts, really, since Tale has come in. They just create so many shots. And I did notice an interesting bit of punditry before the game from Roy O'Donovan, who was on the broadcast in the studio, and he said his preference would be that Robert Mack and Joe Lolly would switch flanks and play as traditional wingers to get service into Fabio. And I'm sure as a former A-League striker, Roy O'Donovan would like a lot of crossing service. But the way they're playing now as inverted wingers, and the directness with which Sydney are playing since Talley has come in, it just means that Fabio plays with his back to goal as a link man more than anything. And Mac and Lolly have license to shoot from the edge of the box, and they cut in so aggressively. So that combined with Jaden Kaczarski having a much bigger role, who I think is a really exciting young player, and it's long overdue that he got his first team chance, has made Sydney look pretty dangerous. And I wouldn't be surprised if they shoot up the standings.
Yeah, yeah. Some super impressive shooting stats under Talay since he's taken over. It's been a real, I guess, change in emphasis under perhaps what Sydney FC were used to under Corica. But they've really taken to the change really well. There was probably a bit of a betting in period, but they certainly seem to be flying now with 3 wins on the trot. You've mentioned, some of those players with big shooting stats. I think Joe Lolly's got 5 goals from his 55 shots this season. Fabio is up to 5 goals from just 33 shots this season, and he's getting 33% of his shots on target, averaging 3.98 shots per game. What as a team, I guess what have the Opta stats sort of been telling you about the way that they're approaching the game under Tale?
Yeah, well, Sydney's stats under Corica as an entire era are pretty good. But the first 3 games of the season were absolutely atrocious. His XG was the average over the 3 games was 0.91. So they were expected to score less than a goal per game with the 3 games this season with Corica in charge. So obviously they had a massive slump. Yes, that's a small sample size, but then you look at the short era where Tale's been in charge, just 8 games now. His XG average is 2.74 per game. Like that is a huge turnaround. And they are not just the most prolific shooting team, but also the highest shot differential. So they're keeping teams out at the other end. They made 8.6 more shots at goal per game than they've conceded this season, which is the best positive differential of any team in the competition. Their XG per shot might not be the highest quality, so they are taking a lot. So that kind of pads the stats a little bit. So that's probably where they can refine and pare back a little bit on the long range speculative shooting and try and take higher quality shots. And that will probably lead to better results. But across the board, they're giving themselves every chance of scoring goals, which was just not the case under Corica to start the year.
Yeah. And obviously, this weekend we've got Unite round, so all the games are in Sydney, New South Wales. So they're away to Adelaide this week at Allianz Stadium. How do you see, you know, how do you see them approaching that game, and do you think they can get another favourable result?
Well, first of all, we'll see how the pitch holds up after David Warner lands his helicopter on it. But that aside, no, I think they're well placed. Adelaide are in a rough spot. They're a little thin. They're talking about signing Stefan Mork again, so that shows you that they really need reinforcements. But I think Sydney FC, with, well, technically the away team, but the home advantage, I think they will get the job done.
Yeah, yeah. And the other perhaps interesting storyline from last week came from the Central Coast Mariners. It was Marco Tullio's last game for the club. Obviously, had a tremendous impact on the Mariners since he arrived. A club that is often making headlines for all the right reason in terms of their progression of youth development and the players that they give a chance to. But Tullio was, I guess, a really good example of how the right import behind that young talent can really make a team tick. And it was fitting, I guess, that he scored the winner in a 1-0 win over Western Sydney Wanderers. Um, Summarise for me, I guess, how you've seen his time in the A League and I guess the impact he's had on that club.
Oh, he's been absolutely phenomenal. I mean, second only to Jason Cummings in impact on that championship season for me. I thought he was tremendous. Like, what a signing. He's exactly what you imagine when you think of a Brazilian player coming in. Often they don't live up to expectations. And, they've got this reputation as flair players, which is, maybe unearned across the board when you look at the quality of Brazilian imports in the league. But Marco Tullio is the ultimate success story. And he goes to a very, very, very competitive league in the J League, and I wouldn't be surprised if he kicks on again from there. He's just a gem. Like, the 1v1 skills, the dribbling is one thing, but just the goal scoring and the shooting quality, that's the way he can strike a ball, is absolutely phenomenal. So, yeah, he was a blue chip import for a team that usually can't afford blue chip, but they tend to get to some of these signings before the other teams, which they need to. And then, obviously their players end up getting poached either by other A-League clubs or by more frequently clubs overseas. But this is the way that an underdog sort of team, a small market team, if you're in American parlance, like the Mariners, should run. And he goes with their blessing.
Yeah. Obviously great for the Mariners to be able to, get the championship and then get a couple of fees in. It'll be interesting to see how, I guess, they're reinvested. But I guess just on Tullio's impact this season, he was the second highest goal scorer for the Mariners. He'd taken 45 shots. He was averaging over 4 shots per 90 minutes. He was reliable from the spot. He scored 2 out of 2 penalty kicks. He provided 4 assists. So, a massive, massive loss for the Mariners. I think the coach was speaking a little bit this week about how they go about replacing him. Will the fee they've received, I'm not sure if it's been mentioned how much they got on the Mariners website. It just says an undisclosed fee. I'm not sure what the rumoured fee is. Do they look to reinvest that money? Do they look internally? There's a few options there. How do you think they'll play this, Josh?
Well, there are some young players that deserve opportunities. I mean, it's not a straight swap by any means, but I really like Miguel DiPizio. I was commentating the Joey's Asian Cup qualification tournament in Shepparton a while back, and second only to Iran Kunda, Miguel DiPizio was outrageously good. He's got a fantastic left foot, and he's just got that kind of confidence of a flair player. He's only 18 years old though, so it's early days for him in senior football just yet. I think Christian Theoharis still has more to give. Maybe, his impact has been amplified because he's been used as a bench player, and maybe as a starter he won't look so good. But he's an obvious choice. Jing Reek as well has lots of speed and can play up front or out wide. You can work out sort of job share situation with him and Qual. But what Mark Jackson has been talking about endlessly, really, if you listen to his press conferences, is we have to be adaptable, we have to be flexible. He's a pragmatic manager in the truest sense, not that it's a euphemism for playing defensive football, but really that he is happy to have the ball and he's happy to play without the ball. And the Mariners, I think, will find ways to get results, whether or not they have Tully on the pitch. But yeah, it is hard to cope without his individual quality. So I hope the scouting department is scouring the globe for bargains and loans and free transfers and more special foreign signings that they can bring in.
Yep, and obviously in Unite round this week they take on Melbourne Victory. We'll run through all the games quickly now. So given we're talking about Mariners, we may as well start there. What are you expecting from this game? Again, it's a really interesting clash between two sides who are still perhaps learning to cope without one of their star players. Obviously, Victory will still without Fornaroli, although it didn't seem to stop them from scoring a lot of goals last week. Not against one of the more poorest defenses in the league, admittedly, but nonetheless, still a good result without Fornaroli in Perth, despite us both tipping a potential upset. How do you see this game sort of unfolding?
Yeah, I mean, Mark Jackson in his presser yesterday said Victory were missing, quote, one of the strikers, which I'm not sure if that's like a Graham Arnold style coach whisperer tactic to not mention the names of the opposition, or whether he just genuinely doesn't know Bruno Fornaroli's name. But I think he should. And I think he should be very thankful that Bruno won't be lining up against them after what he did to the Mariners away in Gosford, that spectacular goal. Game that ended in a draw, of course. But no, I'm leaning towards Victory for this one, just because it's week one of no Tullio Mariners and it's week two of no Fornaroli Victory. So I just think Tony Popovic's side has got a little bit more time to prepare. And also just a bit more quality, really, when you look at the depth of their squad. So I'm happy to plumb for Victory in this case.
I've gone a draw. I think it's going to be another tight affair between two really good teams. Like you've mentioned, Mariners are, have a real emphasis on, setting up for the opponent, and I think against a Victory they'll perhaps be a bit more conservative and they might be able to hold out for a draw. Other around the grounds, we've also got MacArthur taking on Western United FC. What are you expecting in this game?
Well, MacArthur, I keep being extremely optimistic in my predictions, and then the last few weeks they've really dipped. I mean, two losses and two draws. Is it? They haven't won for quite a while now. Since they lost to the Phoenix, it's actually three losses and then two draws. So the last game they won was against Sydney on the 9th of December. So they've been on a bit of a downward spiral, to be honest. So Western United might fancy their chances, but at the moment, it just seems as if Western United can't buy a win. They scored in the 13th minute against Melbourne City and went on to lose to two worldies. They're just in the pits right now. If they play well, they still lose. If they play badly, they lose by more. So I think this is probably MacArthur's opportunity to turn the ship around, and I'm going for a slender MacArthur victory, just as in the last time these two met with Ali Orgler scoring in the last minute.
Yeah, I've agreed with you there. I've tipped a MacArthur win, but it is an interesting one. Like you say, MacArthur's form sort of slipped under the radar, but they're the only team, if you look at the ladder, without a win in their last five. So if Western United were to get a result, you'd think this could be the opportunity for them. But as you say, even when they do seem to play relatively well, as they did against City, at least in comparison to the other performances this season, struggle to get the win. Speaking of City, they're taking on Western Sydney Wanderers in what is scheduled as a Melbourne City home game, but is obviously taking place at CommBank Stadium. It's part of Unite round. I've tipped a Melbourne City win here. How are you seeing this one?
Yeah, this one's actually a really tough one for me. When you look at Mark Rudan's, or Marco, I should say, record against City, it's not great. I think he's only won one of his last 9, if I remember correctly, off the top of my head. I mean, City, I wouldn't say they're rolling. They're doing okay considering the squad that they've got at their disposal, and that 8-1 win over Raw, a really dysfunctional Raw side, sort of glosses over any cracks. Wanderers, of course, have the non-home home advantage, an away game being played at Combank Stadium, so that will serve them well. I think I'm going to sit on the fence here and go for a draw.
Yep. Not an unreasonable tip at all. Next up, we have, well, we sort of touched on Adelaide United and Sydney FC, and I think you were saying, you expect Sydney FC to keep up their winning form. Is there anything Adelaide United can do to get the win in this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty. I think you have to empower their young players. I have long thought that Isaias is kind of past his best in this
Mm,
competition, and they're still super over reliant on him. The Isaias Tunnicliffe double pivot, I thought was a disaster, to be honest.
mm.
And they looked better when Johnny Yull came off the bench. I think Ethan Alagic is another good player. Josh Cavallo's back from injury, can definitely play a role. Luke Giselle is underutilized for mine. I think Calviet has had a good reputation in like blooding players in and not getting ahead of himself.
Yeah,
When Cassini Yengi said all that great stuff about Calviet when he came into Socceroos camp, it's sort of softened my opinion on him a little bit as a mentor and as a developer of young talent. But I still think he can use Yal more, he can use Alagic more, and he doesn't have to always start Isaias as the midfield linchpin. Who they play at centre back is also an interesting question because Nick Ansell came off at halftime with
yeah.
injury and Isaias actually dropped back into
Mm.
defence. So I'm a little bit worried about their back four as well. And how they address that hole remains to be seen. But yeah, I don't think they're going to win this weekend.
Yeah, yeah. I've tipped Sydney FC, but you raise an interesting point there about Viet. Some of those young players, as promising as they look, they really do look like some of them, sometimes it looks like they're playing with a bit of a leash on them still. They're not being given the full freedom to perhaps go and express themselves over 90 minutes. And when a team that really does look like they need to change something up to start getting the wins that they've sort of promised to deliver but haven't really been able to. Perhaps that's the key for Viet. But I don't see too much changing this week. So, yeah, I've also tipped a Sydney FC win. And we also have Brisbane Roar taking on Newcastle Jets. Raw obviously showed signs of improvement in that game against Sydney FC. It was probably one of the tougher assignments in the competition at the moment. Certainly got a taste of the sort of football Ben Khan wants to play. I don't think the execution was quite where he'd want it to be, but it is early days. How do you see them faring against the Jets?
Yeah, I think the more time Ben Khan has to actually coach this team, he only had about 2 or 3 sessions before the Sydney game, the better they will look. I have a lot of faith in him and his ability, but also Newcastle aren't doing too badly at all, and they might be buoyed by the news that has been reported by FTBL today, which is that they have a prospective owner. An Italian billionaire rumored to be taking over the club, so that should be a lift to everybody's spirits. They've been we've been without an owner for so long, and apparently, the new man wants to build around some of the young talents like Clayton Taylor and Mark Natter, who've impressed in a team that's a little bit under resourced, shall we say. I think I'm going to plumb for a draw in this one as well, just with the Khan rebound factor, but also the Jets looking really competitive every week.
I think Ben Carr might get his first win this week, so I've tipped a Brisbane Raw win. And then the last game of the round, we have Perth Glory taking on Wellington Phoenix. Wellington Phoenix, still flying high relatively at the top of the table. Perth Glory, another team that just can't seem to get too many wins on the board. Do you see Perth pulling off an upset here? I know we tipped them. Well, you tipped them to draw. I think I tipped them to win last week. How do you see them going this week?
Well, I did tip a 3-2. Unfortunately, the 3-2 went the wrong way for my tip. But honestly, I've run out of faith in this Perth side, and when they're not playing at home, I'm completely out of faith. I was looking at the kind of win percentages of all the Perth managers the other day, and Alan Stajic is bottom all time for Perth Glory. Yes, he hasn't had long in charge, but the moment his win percentage is sitting at around 18%, which is
Mm.
by far the worst record of any coach, unless you count Kenny Lowe's one game interim stint in charge last year. So, no, I am done putting any stock or faith in this Perth side who flattered to deceive and then lose or draw seemingly every week. I'm going for Wellington.
Yeah, yeah. I've gone for Wellington as well, and we've been robbed of a distance derby technically in this one because they're meeting halfway or thereabouts in Sydney. So don't know if the travel will have too much of an impact, but if anything, I think it probably tilts the scales that little bit extra in Wellington's favour this week. So that'll wrap up all the A League discussion. We'll move across into the Premier League. Obviously, the competition itself had a break last week for the FA Cup. So I thought we'd take this opportunity to have a bit of a look at Aussie Ange and how he's faring in the big leagues with Tottenham. And really, they're the side that's or the club that's been making most of the noise in this January transfer window so far. He's got one in Timo Werner. There's a bit of noise around a potential second signing in Radu Dragusin, a centre back who would be uh, much welcomed by Ange, and he's reportedly choosing Tottenham over Bayern Munich. I think his agent has confirmed he preferred the Tottenham offer to Bayern Munich, despite less money being on the table. Does that, in a snapshot, sort of talk to the way that Ange has captured the imagination of everyone involved at that club and who's looking from the outside in at Tottenham?
Yeah, I mean, is there anything more satisfying for Tottenham supporters than getting one over Bayern Munich after they poached Harry Kane in the off season? No, that's huge, and it only endears Ange further to the supporters who are approaching levels of hero worship for a manager who hasn't won anything.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, it's fantastic. No, I love seeing how enthusiastic they are about Ange and how proud they are to have Ange in charge, which is a far cry from the hashtag no to Postecoglou, we deserve better protests that we were seeing when he was appointed. He's turned around the opinion so fast just through playing style and sheer force of personality. And clearly it's working on players as well. Apparently it was personal phone calls from Ange that has convinced Dragusin to abandon the Munich offer in favour of Spurs. And I think he's a perfect signing, to be honest, when you look at his stats and you look at his style of play as a central defender. He's really comfortable on the ball, loves to play out from the back, really composed. And that's something that Tottenham have lacked ever since that centre back partnership of Romero and Mickey van der Ven has been broken up through injury and suspension.
Yeah. And obviously, you've got Timo Werner coming in as well. He's no stranger to the Premier League. He's obviously played at Chelsea before. What do you think? How do you think he fits into the way Ange likes to play? And what impact can he have at the pointy end for Tottenham?
Yeah, this one I'm less certain about than the Dragusin signing. I do think he's a versatile performer who can play wide, he can play central, he's mobile, his link up play is really good, and especially his pressing is absolutely phenomenal. And you've seen that, playing in the Red Bull system. That's basically the be all and end all of that approach is pressing and making the most of the resulting transition. And he is superb at that. His work rate is unbelievable. But we all know his shortcomings and we know his reputation when it comes to playing in the Premier League and the amount of chances that he's missed. And, he's just got a reputation as a bottler, which, probably doesn't necessarily help a club like Tottenham, who already have that reputation themselves. So I'm a little nervous about that. I'm a little nervous about the team creating loads of chances and Werner fluffing his lines. I can see that coming a mile away. But
Mm.
I hope it happens for him because I was always a fan of his in the Bundesliga. Even if it did take him 4 or 5 chances to score a goal, I always thought he was really electrifying to watch. And the kind of downturn at Chelsea and the complete loss of confidence was a bit heartbreaking, to be honest. So, no, I'm rooting for him, and I hope if Ange can turn him into a proven Premier League goal scorer, that will
Mm.
be the biggest credit to his credentials as a man manager.
Yeah, certainly a player that loves to get involved in the build up. Like you've mentioned, he presses like a maniac, which I'm sure Ange will appreciate. Um, he does seem like a great sort of. It would be a great story for Ange, sort of matching that rise of Ange himself. Constantly doubted wherever he goes. It would be amazing if he could, as you say, sort of help Werner become, add that final part to his game where he can finish so many of the chances that he really does play a big part in creating in the
Mm.
build up as well. And if he can do that, then Tottenham are going to be a real force in this back half of the season because at times that has maybe let them down. In the midst of all the injuries and unavailabilities that they've had, they seem to try and outscore opponents rather than keep them at bay. So if Werner can add a couple more goals a game to their output, I'm sure he'll make a big difference. They take on Man United this weekend, so that will be an interesting fixture, which we'll preview a bit later. I guess one of the other big storylines out of the FA Cup was the Liverpool Arsenal game. We did touch on Arsenal last week. We asked the question: is Arteta the man to bring silverware to Arsenal? And he's let another opportunity slip this season, losing to a Liverpool side that undermanned in the midst of a crazy run of fixtures. They've played again this morning in the Carabao Cup. They're all guns blazing in the Premier League, and they still, couldn't find the back of the net. They've lost 2-0. What are you making of, what did you make of that fixture, and where do you see Arsenal and Liverpool? What sort of comparisons can we draw there?
Well, Jurgen Klopp can't seem to get away from fixture congestion, even when he intentionally tries to lose games. This double sub in the 75th minute when it was 0-0 seemed to me like, we're bringing off Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott for Bobby Clark and Connor Bradley, who don't even have, headshots on Google. That's how few games they've played for Liverpool, these youth team guys who both looked pretty good, especially Connor Bradley, yeah, in
Yeah,
fact. But making that double change to me seemed like Klopp saying, well, if we can't win this game, let's at least not draw it because the last thing we need is a replay. And then they went and won it anyway. So hilarious to me. No, it felt like, Liverpool, well, their hearts weren't really in it in terms of, well, Klopp's heart wasn't really in it in terms of the selection, but they won anyway. And honestly, the transformation in their squad from being kind of paper thin and having a first team and not much else to being one of the most, deep and versatile groups in the Premier League is absolutely extraordinary. I was having a look at, the minutes played this season, Arsenal versus Liverpool, and the amount of rotation and so forth, and all competitions. There are a few different, games played and things and fixtures, but these two clubs have both been in the cups. They've both been in continental competition. And you look at Arsenal, and they've got, what, 6 players who've played over 2,000 minutes already this season.
well, yeah,
Saliba, Rice, Gabriel, Jesus, Bukayo Saka, Ben White, and Martin Odegaard. And then you look at Liverpool, and Mo Salah is the only player to have played over 2,000 minutes. So like they're clearly rotating a lot more, and some of these are enforced absences, but they've just got a much deeper squad than Arsenal, or they're prepared to use that depth a lot more. And I think that puts Liverpool in a much better position in the second half of the year to actually challenge for silverware, even if they are losing Mo Salah for all of January.
yeah. It's not just the depth, beyond the first team for Arsenal that seems to be concerning for me. It's the lack of contribution, going forward from a number of their players, really outside of Saka and Odegaard. They just don't seem to be getting enough, even from the 11 that are starting. Declan Rice is a player who hasn't had. I know he's not necessarily that player, but he hasn't really made much of an impact on them going forward. They don't seem to get much out of their fullbacks in terms of shot creating actions or goal creating actions. So it's a sort of a double-edged sword there. They're not necessarily getting the best out of their best 11, or it's a rather shallow contribution, at least going forward from their best players. And then Arteta just seems to have no faith in whatever's underneath that either.
Mm.
Obviously, Gabriel Jesus's issues with fitness haven't helped, but even his sort of contribution per 90 minutes when he has played, I know it's hard when you're coming in and out of the team. It's hard to see him as being the saving grace if and when he does return to full fitness. They're really going to have to maybe look at the transfer market this month to make anything happen in the back end of this season. But there might be some, more serious questions eventually to come for Arteta. They obviously have the week off this week. In the Premier League, it's a split round, so half the clubs are playing, the other half have a bit of a break, which I'm sure they'll really enjoy. But we will have a look at the games that are being played this weekend, starting with Burnley and Luton Town. It's one of those tougher games to pick. How have you sort of tipped this one?
Yeah, this is the rescheduled fixture, right?
Yeah,
After the Tom Lockyer incident. So I'm sure
correct.
there'll
Yeah,
be a bit of emotion about it. I'm just going to pick with my heart over my head, and I'm going to go for Luton here, just through sheer whatever they can muster. I would love to see them get a win.
yeah. I've tipped a draw in that game. I struggle to separate them. Chelsea take on Fulham. Two teams that have been relatively inconsistent. Obviously, the expectation is always on Chelsea to be up there. They've not really been at the races this year, so no real, um, not really troubling the title challenges. And just looking at the table, they're still way behind the pace, even in the race for Champions League football. Um, Fulham did play this morning, so they've obviously got the shorter turnaround. Chelsea played in the Carabao Cup and struggled to score against Middlesbrough, who obviously had Australian Tom Glover in goal. Um, how do you see this one playing out?
Well, this is bizarre because Fulham is probably the club I understand least in this competition. They seem to always lose when I think they might win, and when I think they'll win, they always lose. It's just unbelievable. You think of the West Ham game,
Yeah,
West Ham were in great form. They beat them 5-0. And
yeah,
then, Newcastle came around, Newcastle midst of an injury crisis in terrible form. Newcastle won 3-0. It's just ridiculous. And then Arsenal come up against them, the might of Arsenal on New Year's Day, and Fulham beat them 2-1. So I really don't understand Fulham at all. I think they have a pretty good manager and they've got some good players. Yes, the turnaround will be tough, but I have zero faith in Chelsea. And Chelsea only played the day before as well because they were playing against
yeah,
Middlesbrough in the Carabao Cup, which they lost, which is
yeah.
unbelievable. So um, Cole Palmer missed three of the most like gimme tap in chances I think I've ever seen in the one game, and he's the one Chelsea player who's actually impressed this year. So I'm going to go for an upset Fulham win just because I think it's preposterous that they would win this game.
It's like,
Counterintuitive, I know.
yeah, it's just a flip of the coin. This one, I've tipped Chelsea because a bit they're like the reverse of your Fulham. The games I expect them to win, they'll go and lose. The ones where I actually think, no, they'll lose this one, they go and win. So I went into this expecting to tip a draw or Fulham, and that sort of convinced me to tip Chelsea. So I'm chasing the wins now, which
We've
is
both
never.
stolen each other's
Yeah, yeah.
tips. We just
That's it.
flipped it. Yeah,
Well, hopefully one
ridiculous.
of us is right. It'll probably be a draw. So there you go. Uh, then we've got Newcastle taking on Manchester City. Um, Struggling to tip against City in this one. I know Newcastle had a big morale boosting win in the cup against Sunderland, their local rivals, where you really saw, I guess, the difference in class
Mm.
between the two divisions. Um, where do you see this one going?
I can't tip against City here. Newcastle beat a championship side that is mid-table in the championship. Well done, well done. He's 13, but Man City just have too much quality. I'm not going to tip against them.
Yep, yep. Another interesting one next: Everton versus Aston Villa. It's a game at Goodison Park that's slightly tougher to tip for me. Um, I have gone for a draw, but I ummed and ahed on this one. I was going between a Villa win and a draw. How do you see this one going?
I think this is going to be a classic. I think it's going to be such a good game.
Mm.
I think it's going to be, thrilling end to end, last minute winner, something like that. It just has the flavor to me of two sides who are desperate for the result, who have both been getting wins lately, but by the skin of their teeth a lot of the time. Yeah, I reckon there might be a red card in this one, and I'm going to go for a dramatic Aston Villa win.
Beautiful. And then we round off this week's action with Man United versus Tottenham. United, this is really do or die time for them in the Premier League. They're playing a team in the top five. They're already looking at the table 9 point. Well, they're 9 points off fourth, and they're 8 points off Tottenham in fifth. Losing this game is, terminal really to their top four hopes. Even though Ten Hag seems to think he's still in some sort of title race in his imagination. I saw some bizarre quote from him saying that's one of the trophies that they're still targeting this season. Can they? They obviously lost to Tottenham away earlier in the year. Where do you see this one going?
Well, I mean, the supposedly toxic presence of Jadon Sancho is set to be out of the club, with them loaning him back from whence he came to Borussia Dortmund. How that whole saga has gone down is absolutely perplexing to me. I still think Sancho is a player, and Ten Hag has just ostracized him. Look, I have to go for Spurs here. They beat them last time. They outplayed them last time. Yes, Spurs have a lot of absentees, but United's form is nothing to write home about.
Yeah,
Yeah, look, I don't think it's going to be easy for Spurs, just considering that they're operating on the bare bones. Whether they can get those signings done, in time, whether Werner plays a part. Usually when new signings come in, they don't start.
yeah,
But if they can get Dragusin over the line, and all the paperwork done and clearances and all that sort of thing,
yeah,
I don't see why you would leave him out. I think you just
yeah.
have to bring him straight into the center of defense as an emergency plug and play, because they don't really have any centre backs. Tottenham, like they're playing like
Oh,
Emerson Royale there. So yeah,
yeah,
I'm still confident in Ange, even though the Spurs squad is threadbare.
yeah. He's match fit. He's been playing. I mean, he slips straight into. I think of all the positions to try and integrate someone, it's probably the easiest one on relatively short notice as a centre back. So if they get that deal over the line, I'd expect him to play. I've tipped a Tottenham win. Yeah, I just think United, even in their FA Cup win against Wigan, were far from convincing. It took a pretty good save from the much maligned Andre Onana in the first couple of minutes to stop Wigan from taking the lead. I can't see United really coping with Tottenham's press coming out of the back. And yeah, I would expect Ange to take 3 points at Old Trafford. Well, that was a bit of a speed run for us. So well done, Josh. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to check out the My Betting Mates columns, the PL Pulse and A League Alert, which are published weekly. And we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, Matt.